When people need protection and help, they call the police. But when the police themselves need protection, special services step in. Typically this role is taken on by special forces or counterterrorism units. Both carry out almost identical tasks. The only real difference lies in the level of danger and risk involved. For missions where regular officers could theoretically make a mistake, and that could mean failure, a specialized unit was created in the United States. Today, it's known as the SWAT Team of Los Angeles, or simply, the California Fighters. It's about SWAT, a formation that you may have seen in movies and series. Though in most films, SWAT always shows up last, after the shootout is already over. In reality, things look quite different. These guys only respond to the most critical calls. Without them, no raid begins. Detectives won't storm in. Brave officers won't charge through the back door to take down the suspects. And there's a reason for that. Most ordinary patrol cops in the US are simply not trained for such situations. Raids, tactics, combat methods, that's SWAT's domain. And when and how they use those methods is what we're going to tell you now. The idea of creating SWAT didn't come out of nowhere. In the 1960s, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was hit by a wave of bank robberies. Not quite as dramatic or glamorous as Bonnie and Clyde, but still a serious problem. Local police were struggling to cope. The issue was that when officers arrived at the scene, they had no idea what kind of weapons the robbers had, how many there were, how they got in, or how they planned to get out. As a result, many shootouts ended badly for law enforcement. That's when the city decided to form a special unit of 100 officers, trained specifically to deal with armed robbers. And the system worked. These officers underwent advanced training and were excellent marksmen. In short, everything was done to reduce the number of robberies. These men became the prototype for what would later be called SWAT. The use of specialized personnel proved that many casualties could be avoided if fighters are properly trained and prepared for a variety of combat scenarios.
When I first developed the concept, everyone at the station laughed at me. They said it wouldn't work and wasn't real policing, it wasn't about enforcing the law.
That man is Daryl Gates. In the mid-1960s, he was one of the key figures involved in establishing SWAT within the Los Angeles Police Department. Today, LA Units is considered the first and original SWAT team in the United States. Now, Gates didn't invent the combat tactics, the negotiation techniques, or the training programs. His contribution was more about the concept, the structure, the purpose, and the equipment. And that's a crucial part of the story. Thanks to this concept, SWAT is now used strictly for the most important and dangerous missions. Each operation's risks and challenges are analyzed by police department experts, who then decide whether the situation calls for SWAT or not.
At first I intended for SWAT to stand for Strike Weapons Assault Team, but I was quickly told that I couldn't create a unit that sounded like it was meant to attack. So after some thinking, we decided the acronym would stand for Special Weapons and Tactics.
In the mid to late 1960s, SWAT officers were actively deployed to suppress black protests, particularly in operations against the Black Panther movement, which sought to dismantle U.S. law enforcement institutions. If federal agents acted as the brains behind counterintelligence and smear campaigns designed to discredit the Panthers in the eyes of the public, then SWAT officers were the muscle. Unlike regular patrol cops, these men were supplied with rubber batons, tear gas grenades, and protective gear, everything needed to ensure no special forces member was harmed in a confrontation. Initially, police raided Panther headquarters alone, but when the Panthers fired back with automatic weapons, SWAT was involved. Regional Black Panther leaders started surrendering one by one. Engaging in a firefight with the California unit was practically a death sentence. In prison, your chances of release were slim. Therefore, most of the Panthers surrendered to the cops and special forces without resistance.
When I stepped out and looked up, we were surrounded by people in black uniforms, black boots, pants, jackets. I thought, who are these guys?
While many confrontations with the Panthers ended peacefully, relatively speaking, not every conflict in SWAT history followed the same path. In 1973, a radical group emerged in California calling itself the Symbionese Liberation Army. SLA for short. Far-left radicals, they were active for only a couple of years, until 1975, but in that time, they caused plenty of chaos. Murders, robberies, kidnappings, carjackings. At one point, they even kidnapped the granddaughter of billionaire William Hearst, who eventually joined their cause. In May 1974, members of the SLA clashed with law enforcement. Police quickly realized they were outgunned. The SLA had machine guns, snipers, and knew the neighborhood inside out. At best, the radicals might escape. At worst, they could kill officers. That's why SWAT was deployed. They attempted to make contact 18 times and offered the SLA the opportunity to surrender peacefully, hoping to avoid further violence. They promised them a fair trial. But when the terrorists refused, SWAT launched an assault. The siege lasted 61 minutes. Over 3,700 rounds were fired by both sides. In the end, the house where the SLA members had barricaded themselves went up in flames. 6 of them were killed. Not a single officer was injured.
First we fired tear gas. But the moment we moved in to begin the assault, we were met with a massive barrage of gunfire aimed directly at us. They had heavy weapons inside, even machine guns. I was proud of what we accomplished. We succeeded. No civilians were hurt. After that, we began receiving requests from departments across the country, asking us to help train their own SWAT-style teams. That's how the expansion began.
SWAT's operation against the SLA was carried out flawlessly. 60 tactical officers were deployed, each with a clearly defined role. Snipers, assault specialists, scouts, medics. It didn't take long for their success to gain national attention. Requests started pouring into Los Angeles from across the country. Other states wanted to establish similar units of their own. That's when Daryl Gates' concept really proved itself. Each unit would operate independently under state laws, yet still belong to a broader, unified structure. Interestingly, while in Los Angeles SWAT is deployed only for high-risk operations, in smaller cities they can be used for large-scale traffic control, clearing roads, securing public events like Independence Day celebrations, or even assisting in wildfire response. Still, their core mission remains unchanged, confronting the most dangerous criminals. Today, referring to SWAT as a single unit would be incorrect. The acronym now refers to specialized formations across the US that use tactical or military-grade equipment and techniques.
With the rise of street crime in the 1970s and 1980s, nearly 90% of police departments in cities with populations exceeding 50,000 formed their own version of a SWAT team, adapting to the growing need for a specialized force to handle increasingly violent and dangerous situations. In areas with fewer than 50,000 residents, about 70% of departments formed similar units.
The officers were trained extensively in advance. There were several reasons for this. First, having learned a bitter lesson from the 1972 Munich Olympics, the Americans chose to prepare in advance to secure the Olympic Village and establish clear response protocols in the event of a threat. SWAT trained jointly with elite units like France's GIGN, Britain's SAS boycotted the event. US officials feared potential provocations from the Soviet side. That's why, alongside foreign intelligence and counterterror units, SWAT coordinated closely with the CIA to stay ahead,
Getting into shootouts whenever possible. And that's a smart decision. Avoiding gunfire reduces the risk of injuries, not only among civilians and officers, but even among the suspects themselves. SWAT is a unit designed to save lives, not take them. The only way to neutralize a person who acts through violence is to respond in kind. To act accordingly, to meet violence with violence. There's simply no other way. There are no magical solutions to problems, nor will there ever be.
Getting into SWAT is not easy. At least 10 years of police service are required before you can even consider applying for the selection course. Training begins with combat techniques, focusing on shooting despite California SWAT officers rarely using firearms in operations. One of the training techniques is called PCR. The candidate navigates through a maze of rooms where doors open randomly, and the officer must quickly identify where the criminal is and where the civilian is, aiming to neutralize the criminal as fast as possible. Not only must the response be lightning quick, but the officer also needs to shoot at a specific target. The target on the criminal's head is a triangle on the forehead. This target is optimal for neutralizing the enemy. If the criminal is behind a hostage, the body would block the target area. The forehead is the only part that directly faces the barrel of the SWAT officer's weapon. But before pulling the trigger, it's important to remember that the hostage could also be harmed. Therefore, instances of headshots are extremely rare. In most raids, everything is resolved at the stage of deploying tear gas and flashbang grenades. And on top of that, snipers are positioned on the roofs of nearby buildings.
I believe the success of SWAT lies in the quality of the people who work there. It depends on how qualified the officers are when they join the ranks. And, of course, the training they undergo. Technology doesn't matter without a clear head.
Every SWAT officer can choose the path that suits them best, provided they master the training, of course. There are many options. Engineers, sappers, stormtroopers, snipers. There are even cases where certain roles are added or removed depending on the state or city. For example, in Miami, there is a special SWAT cast, underwater operatives who attack from the water. It's not easy to get into this group. Only the best special forces officers from other states and cities are selected. However, their use is limited. They're deployed only in cases where dangerous criminals are holed up in ports or holding hostages on cruise ships. Overall, more than 80% of SWAT calls involve standard missions, such as neutralizing armed groups or arresting gang members who may have weapons and criminal associates who could help them in a shootout with the police. For unique hostage rescue cases, there's a special department in the US, the Hostage Rescue Team. We'll definitely cover them in future programs.
We try to train each SWAT member according to their abilities. We have people who specialize in specific types of calls. There are snipers, for example, who require a completely different and more complex training. People from different units always collaborate. Their cooperation helps carry out special operations.
In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan began a tough anti-drug policy. SWAT teams were brought in to arrest gang members, dealers, and dismantle drug labs. In most cases, they were needed to storm locations quickly and arrest criminals. The advantage of California's special forces was that, unlike regular police officers, criminals would surrender at the mere sight of them. Looking at them, it seemed easier to give up than to engage in a fight. From the 1980s to the 1990s, SWAT teams across the US made over 30,000 calls per year. Raids were constant. The system for identifying and neutralizing drug dens or gang members distributing drugs was so refined that SWAT began collaborating with the D. Information exchange between the two continues to this day. Los Angeles Special Forces, in addition to their main duties, assist other units in the fight against drugs in the US. Their task is not easy, as sometimes you don't know who's behind the door, a regular unarmed dealer or a gang member with his subordinates, ready to do anything to avoid imprisonment.
SWAT is a well-trained unit, tasked with handling highly complex and high-risk missions. We have the best equipment, the best training, and the best weapon specifications.
In the seemingly flawless history of SWAT, as it turns out, there are also unsuccessful examples of work. One such incident occurred in 2008, when police in Arizona began their marijuana hunt. They actively tracked packages, conducted raids and arrests, and uncovered nearly untraceable shipments. No one knew where they came from or where they were headed. All they managed to do was confiscate the drugs. Then, one day, they decided not to seize the goods but to track where they were going. The package reached Maryland, to the town of Berwyn Heights. It was left by the door of a large house. Whether by mistake or on purpose, it's unclear, but SWAT officers didn't hesitate and decided to raid the house.
I woke up from the explosion. It was my front door that was blown off. Then people in black entered, laid everyone on the floor, including my stepmother and my 2 dogs. They shot the dogs, then asked, "Is this the mayor's house?" Another replied, "Yes, it is."
It turned out the officers didn't realize they had raided the mayor's home, who, by the way, was completely innocent. This was confirmed by the investigation. Jay Calver filed a lawsuit for the killed dogs, but none of the officers faced any consequences. Only in 2010 did law enforcement state that they were simply doing their job, removing drugs from the streets. They expressed no regrets for their actions, and if it happened again, they wouldn't hesitate. Today, incidents of raiding politicians' homes are no longer an issue. However, drug-related calls are still common. New challenges have arisen, like school shootings. These missions require the utmost attention. Large school buildings have many hiding spots, risking hostages being killed or officers ambushed.
In the US, there are 2 types of SWAT teams, full-time and part-time. Full-time teams are typically stationed in large cities such as Denver, Dallas, and Detroit. The others are regular police officers who are called upon for special assignments when needed.
Every year the number of calls for these units continues to grow. All they can do is develop and keep doing their work. They understand that their responsibility is not only for the safety of civilians, who might be harmed by criminals, but also for the police officers they need to protect. Wherever they are, whatever tasks they are performing, whether raiding criminal groups or assisting at traffic accidents, the goal remains the same: to serve and protect. And there is no difference in which risks they must take or what price they must pay to complete their mission.